Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast with your host, Andrew Keel. This is the podcast where you can get the education you need to invest 100% passively in the highly profitable niche of mobile home parks.
Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. This is your host, Andrew Keel. And today we have a really cool episode planned with one of my business partners, Jon Carcone of Four Brothers Commercial. Before we dive in, I want to ask if you could take an extra 30 seconds and please head over to iTunes to rate this podcast with 5 stars. This helps us get more listeners and it means the absolute world to me. So thanks for making my day with that review of the show. All right, let's dive in. Jon went to Wake Forest University in North Carolina and majored in business. After graduation, he moved to Arlington, Virginia, and took a job with a management consulting company called the Corporate Executive Board and worked his way up to managing a large sales team. In 2009, Jon created Four Brothers Buy Houses, which since then has bought and sold more than 200 single-family properties all over the DC area. In the last few years, Jon started focusing on commercial buy and hold properties, specifically mobile home parks and self-storage facilities in the Midwest. Jon and I ended up partnering up in 2020 after both of us individually had 2 mobile home parks under contract in the same town just outside of Grand Forks, North Dakota. And since then, we have partnered on a total of 7 mobile home parks together with a few more on the way that are under contract. So Jon's strengths are my weaknesses and vice versa. We complement each other well, and it's been a really good partnership. So Jon, I'm happy to welcome you to the show.
I'm happy to be here. I've heard a lot about it, and it's been a dream come true as my Christmas wish that you would finally have me on, and it was granted. So I couldn't be more thrilled.
Awesome, man. Can you start out by telling our listeners your story and how you got into manufactured housing? What was the trigger that made you say, "Hey, I want to own trailer parks someday"?
Who doesn't want to own trailer parks? I feel like as a kid, as this little 6-year-old kid, that's one of the dreams. You want to be fireman, policeman, astronaut, or trailer park owner. So, that was definitely kind of, since a very young age. I made a lot of money. Well, that sounds ridiculous. I made a fair amount of money in my single family flipping business since 2010. And what you realize is that when you have to go hunt and kill in order to eat, it's tiring. And it's a lot easier and a lot more satisfying and a lot better quality of life if you can be more of a farmer where you're planting and you're getting recurring revenue. And so I had been trying to get recurring revenue, passive income in a lot of different ways. I bought some rentals in the DC area. I did some condo conversions in the DC area that I had then held as rentals, but student housing rentals. So I had 25 rentals, but the cash flow just wasn't enough to support my lifestyle. And I'd been trying for a few years. So certainly was sort of frustrated and confused about why it wasn't where I thought it should be. And so, excuse me, I knew I had to go into commercial, or knew that commercial was probably a better way for me to get the passive income that I wanted. And I like parks because they are pretty recession resistant generally, and they have been in the past at least. It's the lowest tier of housing that exists pretty much. So it's generally kind of safe because everybody kind of moves down. The A class goes to the B class, B to the C, C to the D, AKA mobile home parks. And so usually it does pretty well in a recession, and I'm conservative by nature. So I felt like it was a good recession resistant asset class. And I felt like it was kind of ugly and kind of dirty. And so by its nature, not being sexy, I felt like the competition was going to be less than something like apartments. So I had kind of a false start on it a few years prior where I got close to buying one and kind of didn't feel comfortable at the last minute because it's just such an ugly looking asset class. And then came back to it a few years later, and then finally, took the plunge and bought my first deal in 2019.
That's pretty awesome. Wow. To peel back the layers of that, I know you also got involved in self-storage around the same
Hmm.
time, right?
Hmm.
So maybe you can kind of shed a little bit of light on that and kind of the comparisons between the two.
Yeah, yeah. Self-storage is another one that is generally considered to be very recession resistant as well. At least again, it has been historically. And it's also fairly light on the management because you're not dealing with human beings and tenant turnover and things like that. You're just dealing with people's stuff. So there's less generally kind of emotion and drama, and just it's a little bit kind of a little more light in terms of the management, generally speaking. And so, yeah, I thought self-storage and mobile home parks, they tend to kind of both fall in that similar kind of bucket of good recession resistant asset classes. And so I figured I would kind of market to both of them. I do a lot of direct to seller marketing is how I get most of my deals. And bought my first and the only one so far still storage facility in March of 2020. So that was shortly after my first park, which was the end of 2019. So I figured it'd be cool just to get the experience with different asset classes and just see firsthand how they actually perform relative to the pro forma and how much of a pain they are to manage and how time intensive they are.
Yeah, that's very cool. So you bought a park and a self-storage facility around the same time, which has performed better?
Um, they've both performed pretty much to expectations. We had more issues with that first park, probably I would say my very first one, than with the self-storage facility, but we did have some issues with the storage as well. So both of them, I would say, actually took a little bit longer to get to the performance we wanted than I would have thought. We thought maybe a couple months, but it was more like 4 to 6 months that it took, which is probably to be expected anytime you're doing something for the first time, no matter what it is. And it's always going to take longer and cost more generally, whatever you're doing, than you think it will. So, which is better now, now that we're like a year and a half in, I'm happier with that mobile home park. It kicks off a lot more cash flow every month than the self-storage facility does. The park was 1.35 million. The storage was like 800,000. So the park was quite a bit more. And I put a ton more money into it, but yeah, just it does generate a lot more cash flow. The park does. So yeah, happy with both of them though.
Very cool. What has been the toughest hurdle so far for you in the mobile home park business?
The hardest is getting your first deal as an operator. It's a chicken or egg thing where you don't have the experience yet to be able to properly evaluate and feel comfortable buying a deal, but you can't get the experience till you buy your first deal. And so there's that like leap of faith kind of thing and not knowing what you don't know. And as a more conservative person by nature, I was very acutely aware of all the things I didn't know. And so it took a long time, a lot longer than it should have, for me to get comfortable enough to take the plunge and buy my first deal and take that risk. And so just getting comfortable to take the leap of faith was a big challenge for me. And also, having to manage and run a fairly large other business on the single family side while also carving time out to start another line of business, essentially on the commercial side, was longer and harder than I thought. And then I made a bad hire for the salesperson. So it lives or dies kind of on sales when you do direct to seller. And I'd hired somebody for 6, 8 months, and he just ended up not being able to get anything done that was really meaningful. And once I hired somebody new and fired him, that helped as well. So leap of faith, wrong salesperson, and taking the time away from my other business were all some of my challenges.
Yeah, totally. What are the most important things that passive investors, we're talking about LPs here, limited partners, need to look out for when investing into the mobile home park asset class?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like about, I met with the sponsor one time to just invest passively, and I didn't like that he was just buying everything through brokers or was listed. I felt like you want to have as many competitive advantages as you possibly can. And so I like the competitive advantage of going off market direct to seller, which most operators do not do. They just rely on broker relationships and listed parks. So you can have a competitive advantage by getting more of a discount on the purchase than you otherwise would. And ultimately, I think the discount on the purchase relative to the value is probably one of the most important, if not the most important factor of safety as either a GP or an LP. So yeah, I really like I really think it's important to make sure that you're getting a discount relative to what it's worth when you're buying it, because that's your kind of margin of safety.
Spoken as a true wholesaler would say.
That's right. That's right.
What does the perfect mobile home park look like in your eyes, and why?
It's changed. I mean, I started more focusing on the cash flow piece of it, but I think now it's kind of what the average operator probably wants, which is 100 plus lots, good, well laid out park that has some newer shingled roof homes, along with maybe another mix of vintage, nice roads, curbs, and paved parking pads, in a decent city and decent MSA. So that's the ideal in a market like this. Very difficult to find that at numbers that make sense in terms of buying it. But that would be the ideal, I think.
Yeah, when you find those, you got to bring them to me first, okay?
That's right.
What hurdles does the manufactured housing industry face moving forward? And maybe you could shed some light on what you think a $15 an hour minimum wage would do to the asset class.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly longer term and more like esoteric or kind of hard to judge issues is stuff like the cost of construction going down by things like 3D printing and stuff like that. If that ever it just gets exponentially better, and now all of a sudden you can build houses for 10 grand or something, or 20 grand, which I think is quite unlikely, because just the cost of materials are continually go up, and the cost of land goes up, and the cost of infrastructure, water, sewer they have to do goes up. But that's a possible longer term like outside risk that I think is probably pretty unlikely. I think that certainly there's just the market risk wherever you buy any property, that if it's a smaller market and there's a major employer that shuts down or something, and now all of a sudden you have a lot less jobs, that can be obviously an issue for whatever, be it a park or an apartment that you have. And the $15 an hour wage, will be interesting. In theory, that'll make it so people will employ less workers in theory, because if they pay them more, with the workers they do have will make more money. And so potentially at the low end, there might be harder to find a job because there are fewer of them that pay better, but the ones that do have a job, they have a little more money, which could possibly help mobile home parks. So I think probably it'll come out in the wash, would be my guess.
Yeah, I think that's a fair guesstimate there. What do you think about inflation? I think we're already seeing it in our business. Material costs, like you said, are going up, from lumber to skirting. Everything is getting delayed and costing more. How do you think mobile home parks will fare through a high inflation economy? And how can they be moated, if you will?
Yeah, I think, like most real estate, I think parks either will be shielded from any negative impacts of inflation, or they're going to potentially even benefit from it. So if the buying of mobile homes, like we've seen, has gone up, 20% or something in the last 6 months, who knows if that's permanent or not. If it is permanent, now all of a sudden the cost to build a park in terms of replacement costs to rebuild it just went up at least 20%. And so that's just a good thing. That just means that you own an asset now that to rebuild it would cost a lot more. And so in theory, it should be worth more. Also, having long-term debt at a decent interest rate and a lot of inflation, your debt amount stays the same, but the value of those dollars you pay it back with is less in the future. And so you actually have less effective debt. So that's the beauty of real estate, is it's pretty inflation resistant, inflation protected. And I think that it'll be neutral at worst and probably will be a benefit.
Very cool. What can you tell us about Four Brothers Commercial, and where you will be in say the next 5 to 10 years?
Probably in a monastery in Tibet somewhere, meditating 12 hours a day. I don't. Yeah, I don't actually do any planning. Well, I guess I do a little planning. I would say that probably I'm going to continue to try to extract myself from my businesses as much as I possibly can to have as much free time as possible to live my life. So that's been a work in progress, certainly, and that's going to continue. So I expect to be even more hands off, hopefully, on the commercial business and also in the single family business, to have more time to do fun stuff like play hacky sack and go spearfishing and meditate in a monastery and whatever else.
You gotta invite me kite surfing one of these days as well, right? That's one of your hobbies.
I don't want you to make me look bad when you're out there. So I don't know. I'll have to think about it.
Awesome, man. So last question here. What would be like your one tip, for passive investors out there looking at mobile home parks that maybe have invested in other private equity, maybe it's self-storage or multifamily, what would be your one tip to them, looking at the mobile home park asset class and considering an investment?
Yeah, I think because it's, especially if you're not familiar with the asset class, it's going to be really hard for you to evaluate the specific deal that the sponsor is raising money for. And so it's probably a little bit easier to feel comfortable with the sponsor. So how long have they been doing this for? How many deals have they done? How many deals have they gone full cycle with to actually value add and then get to the end point, which is a sale or a refi? And you want somebody that has a fairly long period of time and has done a lot of deals and has a good track record. So I think evaluating the sponsor is probably a little bit like easier to do for somebody not familiar with the asset class, and is probably the more important thing. It's more the jockey than it is the horse in syndications, in my opinion. So that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Jon, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they would like to do so?
There's a thing that says, don't feel free to contact me. It's like an introvert meme, thing. My website, fourbrotherscommercial.com. Feel free to reach out through there, and happy to
Awesome.
talk.
That sounds great, Jon. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really happy we got to do this, and you got to share part of your sense of humor with the listeners.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it, man.
Happy to do it.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today, folks. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Would you like to see mobile home park value add projects in progress? If so, follow us on Instagram @PassiveMHPInvesting for photos and awesome videos from our recent mobile home park acquisitions. Once again, that's @PassiveMHPInvesting on Instagram. See you there.